Along the banks of the Nile, the word has spread. The Canadians are back. They pay 65 piastres a day, with an hour off for lunch.
I'm trying to hire additional men, something like 50. And of course there's a triple that number, quadruple that number that's trying to get jobs. And of course they're quite eager to all be hired, so you get this mad mob scene.
It is summertime in the Valley of the Kings, a time for intelligent persons to find shade and take their ease. But the Canadians are a curious group. They work in their far-off homeland in the ice and snow of their dreadful winter. Then they come to work in Egypt, just at the rising of the insufferable summer sun. They bring 2 air conditioners, but neither of them works. Most of the Canadians sleep on the roof of a small building they call Canada House. It is only 95 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn. It will climb to 120. Perhaps this is appropriate. They are, after all, hunting the Sun Pharaoh. They are searching for the temple of the pharaoh Akhenaten. This was the pharaoh who was almost lost to history. Lost because his immediate successors went to extraordinary lengths to wipe his memory from the face of the earth. He ruled for 17 years, but his name did not even appear on the list of kings. What sort of man could arouse such hatred? He was certainly one of the most intriguing personalities in human history, and yet to this day, the layman scarcely knows his name. Ironically, his son-in-law, a relative nonentity, is known to all mankind. Tutankhamun, young King Tut. He died at the age of 18, having done little of consequence. But when the British stumbled on his tomb in 1922, he became immortal. Amidst this magnificence, there appeared to be some of the burial furniture designed to accompany Tut's predecessor, Akhenaten, into eternity. But there was nothing to throw light on Akhenaten's mysterious death. His tomb had never been found. According to one great Egyptologist, there died with Akhenaten such a spirit as the world had never seen before. For Akhenaten, 100 years before Moses and 1,300 years before Christ, was the first man in recorded history to speak of a single omnipotent God. It was a concept that shook the foundations of ancient Egypt. The history of the Egyptians began on the plains of Giza, just south of modern Cairo. 1,700 years before the birth of Akhenaten, Egypt was already a monumental presence in the civilized world. All the world fears time, said an old Arab proverb. But time fears the pyramids. Around 2000 BC, the capital of Egypt moved 600 miles to the south, and the ancient city of Thebes rose up on the banks of the Nile.
I have some questions about over here.
Oh, okay. صباح الخير.
It is a search for Akhenaten that brings a failed baseball player from Toronto to the ruins of Thebes. Donald Redford didn't make it as a pitcher, and so he became one of the world's most respected archaeologists.
And then start over there.
Yeah.
Just want 2 meters in the whole
I
way.
think the original section, 2 meters in and down.
He divides his time between the Royal Ontario Museum, the University of Toronto, and the ruins of Akhenaten's civilization. Redford's Canadian expedition is but one of several working the area around Thebes on this summer day. The Poles, the French, the Americans, the Swiss explore and reconstruct the other great temples that stand at Karnak, Luxor, and the Valley of the Kings. Readily visible and well-defined are the relics of the various pharaohs, Seti, Tutmosis, Hatshepsut, with the single exception of the enigma, Akhenaten. To find the foundations of Akhenaten, Redford must dig through the centuries. For not only was Akhenaten's temple at Karnak deliberately obliterated, it was believed that he had left a curse upon the land. It was looked upon with fear, a place to be avoided. Akhenaten had been dead 600 years before men dared to settle again on the ruins of the lost pharaoh.
The city must have spread out here around 700 BC. Before that, the area for maybe 6 centuries, in fact, 600 years, had been a kind of a dump, the city dump, in fact. And though we have a meter, over a meter sometimes, of waste material that has simply been dumped here, which is fascinating, though, because people's garbage piles are of great interest. That's where you throw all the interesting things from everyday life. And so we get hordes of pottery here, fantastic quantities, and other things as well, figurines and molds and that sort of thing.
But it is Akhenaten's temple that is the object of Redford's search. The unique properties of his reign can be seen in the very foundations of his temple. The architecture of ancient Egypt was constructed of massive stones, each one lifted into place by throngs of slaves. But the temple of Akhenaten was built on a more human scale, with stones small enough for a single man to carry. They were called talatat, literally the span of 3 hands, and they were first uncovered less than 100 years ago. As is often the case in archaeology, the discovery of the talatat was an accidental byproduct of another expedition. A French team in the early 1920s was restoring a temple of Amun-Re, when from the core and base of the pylons and pillars of that temple, there began to emerge by the thousands the building blocks of Akhenaten. His ruined temple had been recycled. His talatat stones had been used as fill by his successors. In 1971, Donald Redford joined an American team gathered in Cairo. They would attempt to piece together history's ultimate jigsaw puzzle. Each stone was individually photographed exactly to scale. Notations of the precise color combinations on each stone were meticulously recorded. They discovered that thousands more of the stones had found their way to museums and private collections in Europe and America. Then the information was fed into computers. Color, shape, and subject matter of some 40,000 separate stones. Even with computer technology, it took 10 years to arrive at an approximation of the walls of Akhenaten. A paper temple began to take shape.
We came to a point, however, where it was impossible to go on to make any further joins in this jigsaw puzzle without knowing something about the layout of the temple itself, or the temples that this king had erected at Karnak. And so then excavation became absolutely necessary. But that posed another problem, since none of his structures are still protruding above the ground today. They were totally destroyed. Where would one look?
That is why Redford and his Canadian team are here, working through the dust and ancient garbage.
Okay.
And now their tools are not merely the pick, the shovel, and the sextant. For the first time, they have a portable computer on the site.
Site 1. Let's see. There it is. Okay, and these finds are from this pit here, and this one, and these mud brick walls associated with this floor.
It is not only modern technology that conjures up the memories of ancient Egypt. A familiar figure among the ruins of the Nile is a woman known simply as Seti.
How do you do?
How are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you
Good
too.
to see you. You remember
When
Susan
Seti
last
speaks
year?
of ancient Egypt, she speaks with the voice of one who was there.
That's great.
I don't know, it must have happened. And I had an accident when I was 3 years old. I fell down a big flight of stairs and picked up unconscious. Of course, the parents brought the doctor. He examined me very thoroughly and said I was dead. Well, of course, Mother went off the deep end. I was her one and only. And so the doctor said he'd come back after an hour and bring the death certificate and a nurse to wash the body. So I was left lying on my bed, and everybody was fussing after Mother and phoning up for the rest of the family. So when the doctor turned up, I went into my bedroom to wash the body was sitting on the bed playing about. Apparently nothing whatever the matter. But it was after that I started dreaming about the temple and crying and saying, I want to go home. And of course I was assured that I was at home, and I was quite sure that I wasn't. Well, after that, anything I saw with pictures of Egypt in it, I was fascinated by it. Then when I saw a picture of this temple in a magazine, and I recognized it from the place I used to dream about. But I was upset because, as I said, it was broken. Why was it broken? And my father said it was an old temple. I'd never been there. And it was ruined because it'd been there thousands of years. And even I said, well, where's the garden? He said, don't be silly. It's in a desert.
But Seti had been right. There had been gardens. In ancient times, the valley of the Nile was a lush green land, a land of the crocodile and the hippopotamus. And all along the valley of the Nile, the civilization of ancient Egypt gradually took shape. Old Egypt lasted through 30 dynasties. For over 3 millennia, she was the dominant force on Earth, infinitely more durable than the Golden Age of Greece or the Empire of Rome. In fertile fields stretching far back from the Nile, some 7 million peasants worked the land. The fruits of their labor were not all theirs. The hippopotamus took much. The rats, the grasshoppers, and the tax collectors took more. Many were slaves. All of them, in one way or another, were in service to the Pharaoh.
Allah! Up!
They were rich in soil and ingenuity. They turned their swine loose in the fields to tread in the seed, and trained apes to pluck fruit from the trees. In the 14th century before Christ, Egypt was master of the Western world. The capital at Thebes was as great a city as any in history. The empire was in its fullest flower during the reign of Akhenaten's father. Amenhotep the Magnificent, who slew 100 lions single-handed. It was assumed on the death of Amenhotep that life would proceed as before, but they had not reckoned on the new king, Akhenaten. His strange reign, a mixture of splendor and chaos, lasted 17 years and then vanished. It wasn't until the 1850s that modern man unearthed the first evidence of the existence of a pharaoh whose very appearance was strange and unique.
Akhenaten was a very ugly man, almost to the verge of deformity. Had a great long jaw, a long neck and an awful stance. And the funny thing about him, he had so many female characteristics. He had a protuberant belly and very wide hips and fat thighs, and then below the fat thighs, spindly legs like a chicken's. And some modern doctors, judging by his portraits and his statues, they say that he suffered from some glandular disease and that it was progressive. And according to the doctors, he would have become impotent and couldn't possibly have produced children. So where these 6 daughters came from, God knows, but as the daughters all resemble him, I should think they're all his. A funny business. Of course, they say he was a homosexual. There's some evidence for that. But after all, I mean, that's his own affair.
Homosexual, hermaphrodite, hydrocephalic, impotent, or the father of many. All these conflicting theories have been supported by learned men. To Sigmund Freud, he was one of the most important figures in history. To Agatha Christie, he was the supreme mystery, and she was moved to write a play. But if Akhenaten comes to us in a cloud of controversy, his wife comes to us in simple glory. Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one is come. There can be no doubt that Akhenaten adored his queen. He called her his mistress of happiness. In Akhenaten's writings are mankind's first written expressions of love. Before and after Akhenaten, the pharaohs were a parade of giants, colossi of the Nile. Only Akhenaten and Nefertiti are passed down to us in human dimensions. A pharaoh, for the first time, was depicted not as a warrior, but as a loving family man.
here on what ought to be the west side of the temple of Akhenaten, or at least in that area. We've traced the wall of the temple on about 30 meters to the south of here, on the other side of this great mound of debris, and I'm not prepared to move that mound right now. So we've laid in these two squares here to try to straddle the line of the west wall, just to see whether it's still going at this point. But with these large major stone constructions coming so close to the surface, one is loath to destroy them, although one would have to take them up, of course, if one wanted to dig beneath them. But I'm going to try to get around it. We have a good deal of open space there, and we'll just go down in a circumscribed area.
Redford relies heavily on his foreman, Pharaoh. Pharaoh comes from the village of Kuft, some 20 miles away.
Christ, come on.
Through many generations, it has become the tradition of the Kufti to supply the finest archaeological workers. The communication must be close. Redford is as conversant with modern Arabic as he is with the ancient hieroglyphs.
كويس تمام. Okay, تمام. كويس. الحمد لله.
Using a narrow gauge railway, the dirt and worthless debris of previous digs must be carted well away from the working site. But with each succeeding dig, the pieces of Akhenaten's life are slowly falling into place.
His father left him a well-stocked treasury, a well-organized bureaucracy, a strong army. He himself doesn't appear to have been an administrator. He's more a poet.
Perhaps the greatest legacy of Akhenaten is believed to have come from the hand of the Sun Pharaoh himself. Found inscribed in the tomb of one of his courtiers was an epic poem, Akhenaten's hymn to his sun god. At last he can speak to us, his voice carrying across the centuries.
Dawning, glittering, going afar and returning, you make millions of forms through yourself alone. Bright is the earth when you rise in the horizon. When you shine as Aton by day, you drive away the darkness. When you send forth your rays, all the people are in daily festivity, awake and standing upon their feet when you have raised them up. Their limbs bathed, they take their clothing, their arms uplifted in adoration to your dawning. In all the world they do their work.
On this, the fifth summer of the Canadian dig, Redford finally had enough men and money to begin excavation of what was thought to be the Ben of Akhenaten, the spiritual center of his court.
What are you expecting to find here, do you think?
Gosh, I don't know now. I really don't. It would be nice to find some indication of what this thing was. We call it a pyramid, but that's for want of something better.
It has now begun to appear to Redford and his team that this is not, after all, the Ben.
In many respects, it's the luck of the draw in archaeology. Even with all the sophistication of the magnetometer surveys and the resistivity surveys, which will give you some impression as to what is under the earth at a particular point, it's still a bit chancy at times.
And this was the face that seemed to be the best preserved.
Yeah. The more I look at it, the more it does look like a pyramid. One of these late mud brick pyramids. This would be essentially how they built them. It's very strange why they built one over here.
As the heat becomes unbearable, the Kufti and their workers sing to keep their spirits up. One creature looms large in both the mythology and the reality of Egypt. The serpent, rising from the forehead of the pharaoh, stood ready to strike at his enemies. The pharaohs are gone, the serpents remain. The snake men still come to cast their spells over each new settlement. They can, they say, protect the Canadians from the sting of the deadly horned viper.
Are you afraid of snakes? No, not really. In a curious way, perhaps I am. That's my own hang-up. But I don't mind scorpions. Can't stand centipedes.
لا ما تخافش ابدا لا 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 ما تخافش مدير انت ما تخافش انا عارف يعني انا يدك ما تخافش ايوه لا لا ما تخافش تعال خذ لا 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 ما تخافش خذ ما تخافش خذ لا 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 تمام ما تخافش تمام تمام هدي ما تخافش تمام تمام.
And I think probably that's enough. And the next job is simply to pick it up from where it is and keep as much together as we can, but I know it'll fall into a lot of pieces.
Each dig collects its set of specialists. The British call them boffins. Their area of expertise is narrow but deep. Peter French is a leading authority on the properties of the pot. He has a working knowledge of the kitchens of mankind.
This is just a fragment of a very large vessel, a very coarse ware vessel. It's not very nice, and it's not particularly interesting, except that it does tell us that at some stage in the occupation of this area, it seems to have been used for the storage or the preparation of food.
Can you see the?
مين؟ تمام. And that's the whole of it. Nothing very special, but the sort of thing one comes across, and it all gives us a little information.
But further down are the fragments which can illuminate the age of Akhenaten. They are colored in a particular shade of blue. And when an expert sees that blue, she knows that she is handling the pots that served the Sun Pharaoh. But that is just the beginning. The pottery, like the rest of Akhenaten's kingdom, was smashed to oblivion. Each small fragment or sherd must be matched and glued with meticulous care.
That's why pottery reconstruction takes so long. It has to be left for as long as possible. There's no possible way you can put together more than about 4 sherds in a day without destroying the curve of the vessel. So if you'd like to do that gluing, and then we'll see about putting perhaps 1 more sherd on over there. No, that's not quite right. I'm just going to have to go, that's it, like that. Okay?
The pot is the super clue, the primary key in establishing a period of time. From minute fragments, absolute dates can often be established.
Pottery is subject to the vagaries of fashion in the same way that other articles are, but pottery is very durable. It lasts for a very long time, and if we have enough of it from the right spots, we can trace its changes, the changes in its form, the changes in its fabric, and then if we can link those to absolute dates, we can date the site that we're digging. This is where we sort out the pottery, keeping those pieces that can tell us most and discarding the others. We keep the rims, rather a nice one there, because these are distinctive. And we keep the handles. And we keep any unconventional, distinctive pieces of fabric. There's a nice black roughened piece there. A lot of this stuff can't really tell us very much. It's undistinguished common household wares.
It may be true that common household wares from ancient days can tell little, except perhaps that the design was perfect, for they are still being made in the nearby village. The interaction between the Egyptian villagers and the Western archaeologists, between the past and the present, is very real. Redford and his team must eat, and Farouk, the chief Kufti, is a maker of many bargains. Ahmed, chef to the Canadians, began his working day at 4:30 in the morning. Ahmed is now 83, and he was cooking for archaeologists on the day in 1922 that the Englishman Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. Ahmed's bargaining is made easier by his family connections. He has 81 grandchildren, and almost every shopkeeper in town is in some way related.
Do you like making desserts best?
Yeah. Upside down cake with pineapple. I had it last week.
To all intents and purposes, the dig is over at noon. It is 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It is perhaps understandable that the Egyptians also invented beer.
You know what the boys do on that, your dump during breakfast time? They take turns leaping off it.
Oh, I know.
Going as far as they can.
Yes, isn't that wonderful? They take a running leap and
Yeah.
just stick their arms out. It looks like wonderful fun.
Oh, it is, yeah.
I haven't tried it.
It's escaping Helmy, isn't it?
But there were 5 minutes to go today, and I caught one of them doing it.
Oh.
Yes. He laid his basket aside and looked around surreptitiously.
Kids are kids, no matter where you find them.
That's right.
Successive waves of archaeologists have ransacked Egypt of her heritage. The glories of the pharaohs enrich museums from Berlin to San Francisco. Today, only a few relics can be removed from the country. Modern expeditions have photographers and painters. It is their precise reproductions that will be carried back to Toronto.
Here's some painted material for you.
Okay.
And at your leisure, you can, whenever you get a moment.
Done a similar one to that already.
Yeah.
Have you?
We have done it.
See that one?
I haven't done that, no. That's pretty.
Yeah, the same sort of thing.
Something like it.
What would you say about that?
Nothing.
Nothing. I was going to hazard a guess, but I won't. Anyway, now, let me see where it came from. Oh, all right.
But this is peculiar. It wouldn't amaze me if that was medieval rather than ancient. But,
Wonder where that came from. Well, that I don't know.
no. Well, we'll see if we get any more.
Yeah.
Among Redford's collaborators is David Reese, a bone expert from Boston. Already this summer, he has worked on digs in Turkey and Crete. When everyone else is finished, he does the final sifting.
The recovery of such a complete record is of interest for trading patterns. Of course, we get a lot of Nile perch and that kind of thing, which is understandable. This was very much in their diet, but we're now getting things from the Red Sea, cowrie shells, I believe, and even one or two items, fish bones and the like, that indicate the presence of Mediterranean species here. Now that is strange. They should have got this far up the river, 600 miles up the river. At any rate, this is the kind of thing we're looking for, and the more complete the record, the more complete the picture will be of the diet of the area at specific times, because we're doing this for every level, and also where they're getting their food from.
This is a spine of a fish fin, probably a normal Nile River catfish or perch. Strangely enough, most of the material at East Karnak are cattle remains, which one would not have originally expected, since cattle need a lot of grazing area. Certainly today you don't have the grazing area available, mainly sheep and goats today.
Sifting and collecting the bits and pieces of history, archaeologists over the last century have managed to gather enough evidence to establish Akhenaten's unique place among the pharaohs of Egypt. He was born into the world of the ram. The Egypt of his childhood was filled with gods. Osiris, Isis, Horus, a multitude of lesser divinities, and above all, Ammon, the ram. The priests who moved down the avenues of Ammon had grown fat with corruption. Tribute flowed from the far-off provinces. The tables groaned with gold. Harems of concubines were delivered to the temples. The appetites of the priests of Ammon were insatiable. By the time Akhenaten ascended the throne, a mere boy of 13, he had developed a loathing for the temples of the ram. In the words of one historian, the blood of the ram sacrificed to Ammon began to stink in his nostrils. Though still a teenager, he was now a pharaoh, and his word was law, and he proclaimed that the worship of Ammon was a vulgar idolatry. There was but one God, and that God was not Ammon, but Aten, face of the sun. Beside him, as he announced his new religion, was his mother, the Dowager Queen T.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it was Queen T that sort of argued with Akhenaten and said, don't bother about Thebes, go and found a new capital.
And so Akhenaten decided to leave the corrupt old capital at Thebes. Gathering up his pregnant wife, Nefertiti, he and his court set sail in 100 boats. They sailed down the Nile in search of virgin soil, soil that had not been defiled by pagan temples. The great procession stopped by the present village of Amarna. Here, he decided, he would build his city to the sun god.
If you've ever been to Amarna, you'll appreciate perhaps what the sun does to you there. It was chosen perhaps with that in mind because there is absolutely no shade. And with open temples, my goodness, the sun has free play. It can knock a person out very easily. And in the summer, it's excruciating.
Gone were the windowless temples, the darkened shrines of the ram. The new city would be filled with sun. They brought water and soil for the making of gardens, and thousands came to help build the new city. The soldiers of the Egyptian legions came to join in the pursuits of peace, for Akhenaten would wage no war. Here was a new faith based on a universal God, and all men would live in peace under the sun.
بص حط بالراحة على ما تاخد لك صورة. اديها وشك يا أخي. اديها وشك.
Artists and artisans flocked to the new city. They banded together into workshops under the chief sculptors Tutmosis and Bek. Akhenaten had decreed that they were now free of the rigid strictures that had governed Egyptian art for 2,000 years. They were to abandon convention and turn to nature itself for their inspiration. Candor and realism would be the hallmark of this great age of art. In terms of sheer beauty, it would be the finest hour of ancient Egypt. There were no longer feats of war to glorify. Love and the family life became the stuff of art. The king would be seen in all his deformity, just as Nefertiti and her daughters would be seen in all their beauty. Everywhere was the face of the sun, its rays reaching down with human hands. "3,000 years after the death of Akhenaten, the plow of an Egyptian peasant accidentally unearthed an astonishing fund of history. Buried on clay tablets was the entire diplomatic correspondence of the court of Akhenaten. They contained the seeds of his own destruction.
One of these letters is a letter by the king of Assyria, Ashur-uballit, to the king of Egypt, Akhenaten. And he complains in this letter that his messengers have been kept standing in the open sun. He says if people stand in the open sun in Egypt, they will die. He then goes on to say that he knows that the king himself, Akhenaten, likes to stand in the open sun, and that if the king himself wants to die, that's perfectly all right, but not to let his messengers stand in the open sun and die. I think that's a veiled allusion, perhaps, to the fanatical resolve of this man to let the sun dominate his life, and the way in which he obliged his entire court to follow suit.
Some historians will argue that he was the first pacifist in history, a gentle and poetic idealist dedicated to a universal God. Others will argue that if he was not a half-mad hydrocephalic, he was certainly a religious fanatic who had become obsessed with his sun god. In any event, his empire was crumbling around him. From the far-flung provinces came cries for help from his lieutenants. The chariots of the Hittites and the armies of the Assyrians were tearing his empire from him. But Akhenaten did not respond. Perhaps the facts were hidden from him, or perhaps he was, in the words of one writer, deafened to all sounds, save the hymn to his God.
It comes across as a kind of elitist religion, in which the king, queen, and the royal family are central, and everyone else hovers in the periphery. Everyone else bows low, in a groveling fashion, in fact.
There is evidence that Akhenaten's hermaphrodite form had now become a symbol of universal beauty. His chief sculptor, Beck, depicted himself with the breasts and distended belly of his master. Even the beloved Nefertiti was now being distorted to resemble her misshapen husband.
Well, I feel that Nefertiti was as big a fool as her husband. Well, I mean, seeing what he was like and how he was ruining the country, and she was getting nothing from him but a lot of silly daughters. I mean, she ought to have slipped something in his beer and gone off with Horemheb.
Horemheb, master of the king's horse, was one of the unemployed soldiers of Akhenaten's army. Horemheb was growing disenchanted with the sun pharaoh, and even the devoted Nefertiti appears to have finally wearied of his love affair with the sun.
That might have been the cause of the row between her and Akhenaten at the end. Because they had a hell of a row, didn't they? And then she went off and made another palace at the other end of the town and took young Tut along with her.
On the roof of Canada House, near the obliterated site of Akhenaten's original temple, a retired businessman from Kenosha, Wisconsin, has been drawn into the search for Akhenaten. He and 20 other Americans belong to a group called the Earth Watchers. They pay for the privilege of observing the work of the expedition, helping out and learning what they can.
There is an entrance, but the north wall is the one area where a statue is likely to come up. That's where the goodies may be.
So, who's going to be over there?
Well, you and Karen.
Terrific. I'm delighted.
Listen, all these sites are very important. And
the money they pay helps Redford cover his expenses. If nothing else, the Earth Watchers learn that the life of the archaeologist is not filled with the thrills of an undiscovered tomb. Some of the Earth Watchers become disenchanted.
What have you learned about archaeology?
Oh, I've learned that they dig holes in the ground, that they do it very thoroughly and very completely, and probably a little more so than I expected. I wonder about the value of it and the money expended on archaeology for the findings that are made and the knowledge that is acquired.
How do you mean?
Whether all the effort produces enough facts and enough knowledge to make it all worthwhile in comparison with the other problems that Egypt has. Couldn't we spend the money better in another fashion?
Such doubts do not appear to enter the minds of the local population. The cynic will say that if nothing else, the digging is a local industry that provides a lot of work. The modern Egyptian is only a remote descendant of the ancients. In his veins is the blood of many invaders. The Greeks of Alexander, the Romans of Caesar, the Arabians of Muhammad, the French of Napoleon, the British of Queen Victoria. Still, there is a connection to be celebrated, and some of the ancient dances, passed from generation to generation, may be virtually unchanged from the days of Akhenaten. Archaeologists, in their more poetic moments, see their task as that of enabling stones to speak after centuries of silence. But some stones are lost forever. There is no record of the death of either Akhenaten or Nefertiti. They disappear from history. There have been theories of murder, but the bodies have never been found. It was thought for a time that a mummy in the tomb of Queen T was that of the lost pharaoh. There was some evidence of water on the brain, but extensive bone studies ruled out the possibility that they had found their man. Shortly after the reign of Akhenaten came to its mysterious close, the boy king, Tutankhamun, assumed the throne. He was taken back to the old capital of Thebes, and the priests of Ammon recaptured their lost power. The capital of the sun, at Amarna, was left to the desert, and Akhenaten's revolutionary concepts of God and beauty became a mere interruption in the long history of Egypt. The people rejoiced. Akhenaten had moved too suddenly. The people had not been prepared for his God. They once again embraced the Ram of Ammon and returned happily to their old pantheon of many gods. When King Tut died at 18 without children, the royal line had ended, and soon afterwards, Akhenaten's old general, Horemheb, ascended the throne. It was Horemheb who reduced the original temple of Akhenaten to rubble. In a frenzy of obliteration, the faces of Nefertiti and Akhenaten were hacked away. The broken fragments were poured into the pillars of the new temples, to be hidden forever from the sight of man. Akhenaten's temple at Karnak stood for only 20 years, and that was 3,000 years ago. But archaeologists have defeated the purposes of Horemheb. Through the work of Redford and his team, modern man can begin to visualize Akhenaten's magnificent temple that stood here at Karnak. It is unlikely, however, that the complete picture will be known in Redford's lifetime.
Excavation takes a long time and is very slow, and so I don't anticipate that we will ever finish. It's perhaps right that we should never finish, leaving a good deal for people who come in generations to come.
ورداني محمد علي سالم محمود أحمد.
سالم محمود أحمد.
أيوة عندكم. وش الثاني؟
40 70 90.
يلا صلاح.
7000 جنيه يا فندم.
رجب يوسف حامد. رجب يوسف حامد.